The Salamanders, originally known as the Dragon Warriors, were the 18th Legion of the Space Marine Legion created by the Emperor of Mankind. Their Primarch was Vulkan. The Legion remained loyal during the Horus Heresy but were severely mauled in the first Great Opening Battle, limiting the role they could play in the remainder of the war. Their Primarch is never recorded as perishing, and in fact, is believed simply to be missing. The search for him and his presumed great purpose is a defining trait of the Salamanders. Other aspects of the Legion of Vulkan are their great hardiness as warriors and their equally strong constitutions, willpower, and devotion to humanity. In some ways, they can be considered the ideal of what it means to be a space marine. Drawing from the teachings of Vulkan, the Salamanders are renowned as compassionate towards the average citizens of the Imperium and as defenders of the weak. Rare amongst chapters, the Salamanders, with the exception of Phi-Drakes, live amongst the civilian population of their homeworld Nocturne and serve as guardians, exemplars, and caretakers. While some decry this as a weakness, the Salamanders see it as a strength. Even the High Lords of Terror have in the past condemned the Salamanders for this. Similarly, the Salamanders have always evinced a readiness to ally themselves with other imperial forces, to the extent that they are often the first chapter to extend diplomatic overtures. Although the Salamanders follow the Codex Astartes, they nonetheless also follow the doctrines of their own Promethean cult. The Promethean cult places high emphasis on self-reliance, self-sacrifice, and loyalty. It also sees importance in collective decision-making and the good of the whole. To that end, the people of Nocturne and by extension, the Salamanders are prone to holding political councils of elders, to debate and decide upon important courses of action in a way not dissimilar to the quorums of Micrag. The Salamanders hail from the harsh and hot Nocturne, though are also based upon that world's moon, Prometheus. The moon occupies an erratic orbit, thus causing great seasons of severe tectonic activity and weather disruption on Nocturne. The worst of these is known as the time of trial, when, once every 15 Terran years, the moon passes so close that thousands of volcanoes erupt, their ash so thick it blots out the sun. With the ground gripped by constant earthquakes at the same time as this ash winter, much of Nocturne becomes effectively uninhabitable. Rewards for enduring the time of trial can be great. The tectonic upheavals bring materials and ores to the surface of great value, and the aftermaths of such altered geography usually reveal new pockets of natural resources to be explored, mined, or siphoned. This translates to vast wealth by imperial standards, meaning that Nocturne's supplies of livestock, and whatever items the forges of the Salamanders themselves cannot construct can be traded for with the Adeptus Mechanicus, or other imperial corporate bodies. The Salamanders' fortress monastery is located upon the giant moon, Prometheus, acting as the orbital dock for their space vessels. While it is permanently staffed, much of the Salamanders not on deployment can be found scattered over Nocturne, acting as the elders of the settlements from which they came. The Salamanders maintain close contact with their origins and see watching over their homeworld citizens, and by extension, all people of the Imperium, as part of their duty. History. Originally known as the 18th Legion, the origins of what would become the Salamanders are largely shrouded in mystery. In order to protect the nascent legions Astartes from both hostile action and espionage, the origins and deployments of several early Legion gene seeds are further classified beyond usual protocol. These Legion groups were formed and established largely in separation from the rest, and it is generally thought to have a very specific end. The 18th Legion, along with the 6th Legion and 20th Legion, comprised this group of proto-legions. That this trefoil of 3 proto-legions was somehow veiled from the rest during their creation and establishment was something known only to a few. A deliberate effort was made to distance these 3 legions from the others. There are none save the Emperor and a handful of his aides who know what the exact purpose behind this policy was. Sometime in its history, the Legion was named the Dragon Warriors, but it was a name few knew or spoke of. The Legion's first recorded significant action was during the assault on the Tempest Galleries, against the Ethniki during the Unification Wars. achieving victory against impossible odds, though the Legion's active strength was reduced from 26,000 to around 1,000. Nonetheless, they achieved a place of glory in the Imperial military establishment, and this helped the Legion rapidly rebuild with new waves of recruits and war gear. But the losses from the Tempest Gallery's battle still lingered, and as a result, the Legion was often deployed piecemeal, with many legionaries of the 18th spread throughout numerous war zones. In particular, they were used to deal with sudden threats that may appear to the rear, such as Space Hulks or Xenos pirates. Seldom did the 18th fight on a battlefield of its own choosing, but they nonetheless received extensive battle honors. Meanwhile, it is believed that the Legion's Primarch Vulkan did not immediately reunite with his forces upon his rediscovery, instead serving alongside the Emperor for several years. When Vulkan came to his Legion, it was in the hour of their need. The 18th, led by their Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn, had become embroiled in the defense of a cluster of worlds near the Tara's division against a horde of orcs. The 18th was the only Space Marine Legion able to respond to the crisis. Fighting against vast and overwhelming odds, 19,000 Space Marines held out against millions of Orc raiders and their fleet of rocks. The actions of the Legion had allowed the evacuations of 3 entire planetary populations to the nominal safety of the Tara's system, but at a terrible cost. Their Primarch, however, learning of their plight, refused to stand by and instead joined the fray. When Vulkan arrived, he did not do so alone. He brought with him 3,000 new initiates and equipment from Nocturne. The reinforcements brutally fell upon the Orcs, spurring the surviving Space Marines to counterattack. Caught between this hammer and anvil of savagery that overmatched their own, the Orc horde was broken and put to flight, and the survivors were relentlessly pursued and consumed by fire. In the aftermath, the two halves of the 18th Legion met and were unified when Vulkan finally revealed himself to his sons. The survivors of the 18th Legion knelt immediately, but Vulkan bid them rise, saying that all his sons were equals and he was no petty king needing shows of obedience. Instead, it was he who knelt in honor of the lives they had saved and the price they had paid. Then, seeking out the mortally wounded Lord Commander Vaughn, he conferred the formal transfer of the Legion's mastery by presenting the fallen warrior with the broken power claw of the slain Orc warlord. The Salamanders were apparently reorganized by Vulkan upon his discovery and assumption of command, with that organization said to still be in effect in their current form, with 7 companies to a chapter, each company being founded by the 7 different great settlements of Nocturne and commanded by a captain from that settlement. The number of chapters in the Great Crusade-era Legion is currently unknown, but they had at least 34 companies. The Salamanders are often said to have always been the smallest legion, but how this claim stacks against the paucity of both Emperor's children and 1,000 sons during their respective histories is not yet known. The Salamanders' role during the Horus Heresy is not well known to Imperial scholars. What is certain is that the Legion, along with the Iron Hands and Raven Guard, was part of the first wave of attackers during the Battle of Istvan V. After the announcement of Horus's treachery and the destruction of Istvan III, the Emperor ordered 7 legions of Space Marines to attack the forces serving his former son and friend. But among those 7 legions, 4 were already traitors. The initial landing force fell into a trap and, despite their martial skills, the 3 loyal legions were forced to begin a tactical withdrawal toward their landing site, which had been fortified by the 4 traitor legions forming the second wave. At this moment the second wave opened fire on the retreating Marines, crushing them between the hammer of Horus's forces and the anvil of the fortified drop site. Despite a heroic defense, the 3 loyal legions were practically destroyed. All but a handful of battle brothers fell on that fateful day. First Captain Artellus Numion managed to leave a scattered group of survivors off the planet, but their Primarch was missing. After this sad defeat, the Salamanders, as well as the other 2 betrayed legions, were largely unable to perform any tasks the Emperor had planned for them, and spent much of the rest of the time of the heresy rebuilding their forces. Vulkan was briefly made a captive of Knight Lords Primarch Conrad Kurz, But despite multiple executions, the Night Haunter could not figure out a way to kill the perpetual Primarch. Eventually, Vulkan was able to escape, and along with scattered survivors of his legion, they reorganized in Imperium Secundus under Rupert Guillemin. There they came across the shattered body and mind of Vulkan, who had his sanity restored after being stabbed by John Grammaticus wielding the fulgurite but apparently died in the process. The Salamanders on Mikrag thought Vulkan dead and placed him in the stasis capsule Unbound Flame to lay in state, in preparation for funerary rites to be undertaken by his legion. During this time, the casket was given an honor guard, which some of their number believed they heard a heartbeat from. Later, the Salamanders led by Artellus Numion brought Vulkan back to Nocturne but were pursued by the Death Guard. After a brief but fierce battle, the Salamanders were able to resurrect Vulkan after Numion provided himself with the final sacrifice. Following his resurrection, Vulkan was discovered by 3 Salamanders, Atok Abademi, Berek Zytos, and Ijan Gargo, but forbade any else from knowing of his rebirth. Instead, Vulkan led the 3, dubbed his Drakeswood, into the depths of Nocturne where they entered the Webway. During a perilous journey guided by the Talisman of 7 Hammers, Vulkan, and the trio eventually arrived at the Imperial Palace. There, Vulkan met with the Emperor and learned of his purpose to oversee the activation of the Talisman and the destruction of terror it would bring, should Horus emerge victorious in the coming struggle. Meanwhile, Salamanders, along with Iron Hands and Raven Guard, survivors of the drop site massacre based on the Sisypheum, began a campaign of vengeance against those who betrayed them, striking at Fulgrim and Proterabo on the Crone world of Idris as well as Alpha Legion outposts. Other Salamander survivors began a similar guerrilla war against the traitors, perhaps most notably those under Shadrach Medicine. One force of Salamanders, supported by other Shattered Legion members, ventured to Istvan V on the Ebon Drake, where they recovered Cassian Vaughn, known as Cassian Dracos since being entombed in a dreadnought. The former Lord Commander assumed command of the mixed band and reorganized them as Disciples of the Flames. The Disciples went on to fight in the Mezoan campaign, saving Mezoa from traitors and absorbing a large contingent of Iron Warriors. Having morphed into an almost religious cult, the Disciples of the Flames defended Mezoa and fought Horus armies for the rest of the heresy, but their ultimate fate remains unclear. The Salamanders on Nocturne meanwhile continued to wage war on the traitors even as the Siege of Terror raged, battling the Emperor's children in the Pale Stars following the destruction of Chemos. Whilst the Salamanders altered their squad-level organization to follow the strictures of the new Codex Astartes, they were able to retain much else of their Legion organization, some say because there were too few of them to split into successor chapters. Until the coming of Primaris Space Marines and the Ultima founding of M42, the Salamanders were officially reckoned to have no descendants, though several Imperial scholars have pointed out various similarities in unit markings and tactical dogma in the Storm Giants and Black Dragons chapters. It is possible that these chapters were created at some unknown, later date from stockpiled gene seed. According to the Dark Kraken's member Patara, a large number of Salamander's successor chapters were created during the Ultima founding. His Ultima chapter was not given the exact number of successors, though, and he only knew of the Dragon Spears and Iron Drakes. Oft considered the smallest legion, the casualties of the Horus Heresy, plus their own highly stringent recruitment and indoctrination processes made not only their rebuilding seemingly glacial, but resulted in them coming in under Codex-approved strength for a single Codex chapter. In accordance with Vulkan's original reorganization of the Legion, the Salamanders chapter is formed of only 7 permanent companies, each one nominally staffed at a little over the Codex-approved 100 Astartes. Nevertheless, the Sons of Vulkan were able to forge themselves anew, and their steel has ever since been drawn in the defense of the Imperium of Man. In the absence of Vulkan, the captain of the first company is considered the chapter master. This position is seen as a regency, however, and is occupied in the belief that it will one day be relinquished to the true holder of the position. Gene Seed. Salamander's gene seed is highly unique and mysterious in origin. Along with the Space Wolves and Alpha Legion, the Salamanders had unique gene seed created for a specific purpose by the Emperor. This trefoil was all kept apart and distinct from the other legions during the Unification Wars and Great Crusade. There are none save the Emperor and a handful of his aides who know what the exact purpose behind this policy was. As far as can be determined by the Magos biologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Salamander's gene seed appears to be both stable and as yet uncorrupted. An unusual trait of the Salamanders is that their battle brothers tend to be slower in reflex reaction than other chapters. Though the origin of this factor is debated, it is unknown whether this defect is due to a problem with the gene seed that manifested as a result of most Salamanders being raised on their high-gravity world, or the psychological result of the chapter's doctrines and psycho-conditioning against hastiness and impetuosity. However, it has been noted that a Salamander's Space Marine can move just as quickly as any Astartes equipped with power armor, and are still significantly faster than those of a normal human. Also, as a result of a reaction between their genetics and the high levels of radiation on Nocturne, Salamander's battle brothers have dark or jet-black skin and bright, burning eyes. This frightening appearance is entirely superficial but has intimidated more than one rebellion into submission without firing a shot. Recruitment. Like all chapters, the rigors meted out to aspirants recruited from the population of Nocturne are harsh, and the deadly world makes for the perfect proving ground for these potential warriors. A large part of Salamander's training aims to transform the aspirant not only physically but also mentally, weeding out those who would not live up to the ideals espoused by Vulkan. Commonly, the first major challenge aspirants face is a grueling march across Nocturne's ash wastes, braving native fauna. After this, they will oversee a series of challenges based on the concepts of earth and fire. What challenges are presented vary. The Salamanders are noted to stipulate a long and arduous recruitment process for initiates. They start young, at around ages 6 or 7. For these first years the apprentice is merely that, a worker in the forge of a space marine, who will watch over and judge the prospects of the initiates. After some years, the apprentices are judged by the chapter's apothecaries and chaplains in a series of examinations. Those successful will be taken for first-stage implantation. At set intervals throughout their training, the initiates must replicate feats performed by Vulkan in his youth, including those he performed in a contest with the Emperor. This will culminate in them being required to hunt and slay a salamander. This final task sees the initiate accepted as a full battle brother, and they forever will preserve and respect the drake's hide as part of their duty as a warrior. Some warriors will wear the hide upon their power armor. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.